This is the World Revolution, and we're going to talk now about the situation in Ukraine today, October 26, 2025, 8 a.m. Here in Rio de Janeiro, 2 p.m. there in Kyiv. As I record this video, we had a major Russian attack on Kyiv once again, another night, with many drones and missiles against Kyiv, people killed, civilian buildings hit, absolutely no, no military concern, none, no military targets, only civilian targets. Complete nonsense. Yes, we had deaths and injuries here in Kyiv, and here in Kyiv as well. The Russians used a long-range air defense system for the first time to reach Kyiv. That's also very sad. There was a lot of destruction here, right? On the front line, we had a surprising action by the Ukrainians here, retaking several cities here in Pokrovsky. It seems like a very large movement, a very large Ukrainian counterattack here. We already mentioned yesterday that we were seeing this Ukrainian movement around here, right? Another thing that's drawing attention is the fact that the Ukrainians hit, or at least the Russians are saying they hit, this water reservoir here in Belgorodia, okay? This reservoir, which is near Grafovka, was reportedly hit, and its volume is decreasing. As a result, all these rivers here in the region are filling up with water. Maybe that's the way the Ukrainians found, maybe, okay? No, I don't know what happened. I'm going to tell you the possibilities here, to try to nullify this Russian advance that's happening here in this region here in Ukraine, between Lusk and, Rakhiv, right? Furthermore, there was a major cyber attack by Anonymous from France against Russia, and there's also the possibility of more sanctions from Trump against Russia. Let's talk about these and other topics in detail. This news was suggested by Lobo Bronco. This is Pinto Preto. I only make love listening to Ancapso and several other people. Thanks to the people who suggested news on our website, wrevolving.com. And thanks to you who are watching our video. If you like our content, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel, okay? Well, from yesterday to today, the Russians launched an attack with 101 drones against Kyiv, mainly. 90 of those drones were shot down, but there was still an attack, there was still damage. Once again, residential buildings were attacked. You can see an apartment building on fire here. Look, it's absurd. The firefighters working there in the city of Kyiv. Once again, 31 people injured, including 5 children. Unfortunately, 3 people died in these Kyiv attacks, a 19-year-old girl, her 46-year-old mother, and another person whose body is still being identified. Also, it was precisely this 9-story apartment here that was hit. This is truly absurd. Another cowardly Russian attack on Kyiv, right? And well, there was also something very worrying in Kyiv. Kyiv is this city here, it's Zelensky's hometown, okay? This city here in central Ukraine was hit by cabs, right? The Russians have been using cabs. They're very heavy, very large bombs, with very low accuracy. In other words, they cause a lot of damage and rarely serve any purpose, but the Russians love to use them. On the front line, the Russians use these bombs to completely destroy the city, to leave nowhere for the Ukrainians to hide once they manage to advance into Ukraine. This is really sad, but anyway, this type of bomb was used there against Kyiv, right? Well, a few days ago we talked about a Russian attack on a mine, where there were almost 500 workers underground. And the information we have now is that they were all rescued alive, without any major problems. No injuries were reported. This is the biggest attack, and it's the 7th major attack Russia has carried out against Ukrainian mines. This is once again a very cowardly thing to do, right? Now there was also a Ukrainian attack against the Tula and Ryazan regions, okay? Here, look. More than 10 explosions were heard in the Tula region, and propagandists write that it was the drones that were destroyed, that there was nothing, no problem. Yes, mainly in the Leninsky and Zarishny districts, right? And here in Ryazan, there were also explosions at night. If anything was hit, we don't have any information, okay? Eventually, something might have been hit, but you know, we only have information about what was hit when people publish a video showing the things that were hit, right? That wasn't the case here. They didn't publish anything, so we can't know if anything was actually hit from yesterday to today. The Tula and Ryazan regions are here, look, Tula is here, Ryazan is here, okay? So these are the two regions that the Ukrainians have been attacking quite frequently and that may have been hit tonight by Ukrainian drones, but we don't have any information on that yet, right? Well, now something very curious is this. A dam was reportedly hit by Mars, according to the Russians, okay? After the dam in Grafovsky was hit, the water level is starting to drop and has already dropped several meters, right? Furthermore, in the region of the Severskets extreme, some trenches were flooded, and some villages had to be evacuated. If this is some Russian manipulation, we don't know. Maybe the Russians opened the dam, right? A dam, just open the dam and it leaks, or if this was the result of attacks, we don't know, right? As I told you, the Russians are saying that the Ukrainians attacked the dam with the Mars, but we can't know, right? Here, look, the dam is this one here, look, in Belgorod, in this region here, look, see? This one here is the dam. Here's the Grafovsky city, and it's a big dam, there's a lot of water here. The dam that was allegedly damaged is this one here. And with that, the reservoir's volume is dropping and is supplying water to the Seversky, which is this river that flows here. And then it enters Ukrainian territory, see? So it makes up several parts of several front lines here between Ukraine and Russia. So, in principle, it could have been anything. It could have been the Russians to hinder the Ukrainians. It could have been the Ukrainians to hinder the Russians. It could have been a lot of things. We still don't know what the cause of this dam here was, right? The Russians are the ones who typically destroy dams to help or hinder the enemy, right? They even did that with the Novaya Kharkiv dam, but anyway, let's wait for more information on that. Now, on the front line, we have very positive information, okay? The Ukrainians continue advancing in the Bunny's Ears region, so they regained control of Kusherivar. They had already achieved it a few days ago, right? This was the Ukrainian army's warning, as they had already completely cleared the city. Well, the Russian troops were either killed or captured, and they also took several territories east of Vilnius and Novaya Chokhovikov and also liberated Shuketsk and Zakhovik. In short, they liberated a lot of things in the Bunny's Ears region. This entire region was liberated by the Ukrainians here. So, good news, right? Because, you know, there's another large pocket of Russians here in this area. Well, the Russians are trying to break through the siege here towards Cherov, but they won't be able to, right? In other words, the Russian situation is getting more complicated here. Well, Vilnius is here. The Ukrainians advanced in this situation, in this sense, precisely to clear this area here too, right? Here are some images of the Russians trying to make this advance here north of Pokrovsk. In fact, this advance here was the biggest advance in a long time here, look. Well, and the Russians made the 5th major mechanized assault near Pokrovsk. Once again, what are they trying to do here? They're trying precisely in this region here in Pokrovsk. They're trying to break through the blockade here and recover the soldiers who are trapped here. There are a lot of Russian soldiers trapped in this pocket. Unlike this map here, it's cut off, right? And the Russians are trying to get here and reconnect with the Russians who are here, right? This map here shows it better. The Russians are trapped in this area. The other Russians are trying to launch an attack here to get to them and free these Russians, but they won't be able to, right? They ended up with several armored vehicles trapped. It's hard to count how many were destroyed by the bad weather, right? We're already in the so-called mud season there in Ukraine. Lots of rain, lots of mud, so it's very difficult to move armored vehicles around there. How many were also destroyed? Because there's a lot of fog, right? But there are certainly dozens of armored vehicles destroyed in this attack here, look, in the Russian attack against Ukraine. And as a result, they were all destroyed there on these little roads. They can't get off the road because it's so muddy. If you leave the road, you get stuck and then a tank breaks down, the others are all stuck here. One armored vehicle stops, the others all stop, right? There are more images here. Today, Russian forces tried to cut through the defenses of the 33rd Ukrainian Brigade near Volod-Malivka, right in that area. 3 of the 5 armored vehicles got stuck in the mud, abandoned, and then hit by FPV. You can see the people trying to get out and got stuck in the mud, right? The other two were destroyed along with nearby units. So, once again, the Russians are trying to advance here and failing miserably, right? Well, with that, we have this Ukrainian advance here in this region around the bunny ears, making the situation even more difficult for the Russians. The situation in Pokrovsk isn't simple, right? Here, look, the enemy managed to penetrate the city of Pokrovsk, which we've been monitoring for a few days. There's urban fighting, right? It's believed that about 200 Russians are in the city of Pokrovsk, and, well, it's still just infiltration. They won't be able to take over the city, but it's a worrying situation, right? As we said, the Ukrainians have advanced not only in Pokrovsk, but also in Kupiansk and Sisk there in Lima, but the situation is still worrying. Let's see if we can win this, right? Palais Volin's maps here show some Russian advance here in Wansky, but very little. Interestingly, Wansky is very close to that dam. It could be that the objective here was to flood these rivers here to prevent this attempted Russian advance in that direction. That could be it, right? Here in Lima, the Russians continue to make infiltration attempts here, and it's the Ukrainians attacking here in relation to Torsk, right? Remember that according to the Ukrainians, they've already liberated Torsk, okay? Torsk is already under Ukrainian control. If Torsk is already under Ukrainian control, the Arichna, the Russians, can't hold it, and all these infiltration here will die. But let's see what will happen here, right? Here's the great Ukrainian advance. All these areas in yellow here are precisely areas that the Ukrainians have retaken. So, you can see the Russians' problem in this direction. The Russians are trapped in this area here. They can't get there trying to make this connection here, they can't. And the Ukrainians have been advancing quite a bit here, right? And finally, here in the direction of Pokrovsk, more infiltration from all sides, but for now, there's no Russian control here anywhere. The Ukrainian defense forces regained control over the villages of Kucheryar and Shyretska in the last 10 days, according to the Ukrainian General Staff, right? Since August 21st, the situation in the area has stabilized, but now there's the Ukrainian attack, right? Retaking these areas there, right? Today, Ukrainian soldiers liberated 185 kilometers and cleared 243 kilometers in the territory of the Pokrovsk district in the Donetsk region. In other words, excellent news. The Russians have amassed about 200 soldiers in the city of Pokrovsk, and there are battles taking place inside the city, right? Our defenders are stopping the enemy's attempts to advance more forcefully and establish a foothold inside the buildings there. The Russians haven't achieved that yet. That's good news. Well, another piece of news from the front line is that calls have been intercepted from Colombian mercenaries fighting for the Russians. So, remember, there are plenty of Colombians in this war. Most of them are fighting for Ukraine, but there are some Colombians fighting for the Russians, along with the Cubans, right? And the mercenaries are saying they have orders to kill Ukrainian civilians. That's very sad. Another war crime recorded and noted, right? Well, the Institute for the Study of War talks about the Russians' attempt to create a direct investment fund to save Russia's finances, to try to convince Trump that there are no economic problems in Russia, that everything is fine. We know things aren't going well in Russia, right? Well, there was a major cyber attack in Russia against several servers, especially the Kremlin servers, okay? The Kremlin was attacked by an anonymous group from France, and apparently they used SKL injection. So here it is. There was an error here on a Kremlin page, from the Kemen.ru website, saying it's an SQL syntax error. This kind of thing indicates you have a SQL injection problem. And if you have this kind of problem, my friend, just use SQL map. You download the enemy's entire database. It's impressive. This type of attack is very powerful, okay? If you want to know how SQL map works, how to use SQL injection to download the entire database, I have a video about it on the Safe Source channel, which is my channel where I talk about information security, right? So, apparently, a pretty serious attack against the Kremlin, and here's the information, was carried out by the French group Anonymous. According to them, they took down the entire Kremlin main network, the entire Kremlin subnet, and also downloaded the entire database. Here, look, the Kremlin servers are all under control, right? Let's see what information they can get from this. They can do some cool stuff with this, right? Well, the United States is preparing another wave of sanctions, targeting Russian banks and the oil and gas sector, according to ERS, right? Here's also the economic value here in Brazil is being affected by these sanctions against Russia, which are expected to increase. There will be more sanctions against Russia, so, excellent news. Trump is pausing for a few weeks to see the Kremlin's reaction, while bipartisan sanctions legislation is also moving through the Senate. A vote is expected next month, so the situation should get worse for Russia in the coming months, right? Well, another interesting fact, just to finish here, Mr. Beast, who is a very well-known YouTuber, has a huge audience here on YouTube. He created a program rescuing several animals that are in difficult situations around the world, right? And one of these animals, 3 lions, he rescued in Ukraine, right? So these are places that are probably linked to war and are having such a hard time keeping them, the animals, and they were rescued by Mr. Beast here. Excellent news. That's it. It's great that he's doing this humanitarian work with animals, right? Thank you for watching the video until the end. If you like the content, don't forget to like it. This helps the channel grow and reach more people. If you didn't like it, leave a dislike and explain in the comments how we can improve. Also, comment on suggestions for topics we can bring here. Insulting comments or those defending dictatorship and war criminals will be summarily blocked. Thank you for your understanding. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, consider subscribing by clicking the subscribe button below and clicking the bell for all notifications. If you'd like to help the channel, see how you can do so on our website.